Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Tomes and Tunes. I am your host, Arielle Silver, and this is my weekly book talk and song swap with songwriters from all over the place. We've been doing this for, I think this is week 48. It's been one of the highlights of this past year, one of those silver linings out of this interesting time. And week 40, what did I say? 48. This week I am very happy to bring on a Joshua Tree-based songwriter, Rosenberg. He and I met, I think we met actually before, but a while back, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, we ended up in a song circle together, and I loved the song that he played that night, and there was sort of a shared interest and love of poetry. So I asked him if he would come on the show, and I'm very happy to bring him on right now. Rags, here you are. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
It's always funny because it's like we get into a great conversation beforehand, and then I look at the clock and I'm like, oh, we got to go live now. So
Yeah,
we're sort of like, we're in the middle
here
of
we
a few
are.
different conversations, but here we are.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. For those of you who are tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, thanks for being here, and please say hi in the chat box. Let us know you're here and where you're coming from. Kind of interested if anybody out in Joshua Tree is going to tune in. But Rags, you're originally from the LA area, and now you're living in the desert. But you did a little bit of a stint on the East Coast. We got some similar territory. Both of us have spent some time in Nashville, but you were there for a lot longer than I was. And now we're both out here in California again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
good to be back.
yeah, totally. You are a poet and a songwriter, and not just a poet and a songwriter, but a poetry lover and a song lover as well. And just now, just when I looked at the clock and I was like, oh, we're on. We were talking about how you're right now doing a lot of writing and work on music production. And I was thinking a lot about what you were saying in that shift, when you're prepping for a live show, of course, you're doing a lot of rehearsal and sort of fine tuning the details of your live performance. But when you're in the writing mode, you are very likely not even picking up a song to it's a very different sort of mode. Like you're not preparing a song to be performed, and you're not sort of doing that sort of polishing. You're polishing the writing part of it, but not the performance part of it. Um, will you pick up what you were sharing before? You said that you were writing a
Sure,
lot.
sure. Well, just to complete the thought of what you're talking about, for the past year during the time I've been locked down here in the desert, I was doing a lot of Zooming, both co-writing with other writers and also these kind of virtual Zoom circles where, anywhere from 5 to 20 people would be on a Zoom call and we just kind of trade songs. And I finally had to stop doing that because it was just taking too much time to try to remember the songs during a period of time when I was very heavily writing. I just wanted to write. That's what I wanted to do last year. And so it's been very difficult. In fact, for the song I'm going to do today, as I was telling you, I had to kind of relearn it, but that's okay. It kind of comes, my brain only has so many neurons and little synapses that are trying to fire at this age. And so, you do what you can do. And I need to stay focused in order for me to accomplish anything. And I took I belong to a group in Nashville called Songtown. And I took a class from them where they sent us 3 Nashville produced tracks. That's just like a fully produced song, but no melody, no vocal, no lyric, just the tracks. And our job was to do what they call in the industry top line them, which is to say write the lyric and the melody to it. So I did that for 3 songs, and it's so odd to write a complete song without ever picking up a guitar. I mean, I just have to say it's an incredible experience. But then if you want to, and these are not songs necessarily that I would then perform, because stylistically they're not the kind of, they're not here, you know. They're just not, they're not coming from there so much like it is when I pick a guitar up and just have something I want to write about.
Yeah.
And then I took this month, I just finished this, as I was telling you, this month-long class from the One Republic guy, Ryan Tedder, on production. And so in that class, I had to create 3 produced tracks of my own and then top line those. And so it's been a long time without picking up a guitar and actually, you know, playing a song, you know, or writing a song with the guitar in my hands. It's a very different way to experience music as a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been writing a song a week lately, and I'm sort of shadowing this. There's this organization called Real Women, Real Songs, and there are 21 people participating in this project. 7 of them are visual artists, and the rest are all songwriters. And every week there's a prompt, and I'm not actually in the group. I'm just shadowing them. So I'm just, you know, kind of taking their prompt, and I have a friend who is in the group, and every week I send her my song just to hold myself accountable. And this past week, I was sort of I didn't think of it this way, but for the first few days I had the changes, I had the time signature, I had the feel. I could not top line myself. Like, that was an interest. I don't normally write that way, and I have recently written that way a couple times, and each time it's a totally different shift of mind. When I am writing the changes underneath and don't yet have any real idea of what I'm doing with the lyric, and then add the melody on top of that, it's a totally different way than starting with the idea and the lyric and the melody and finding the changes underneath, which is, I think, the way that I usually do it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Same here. See, that I think that's beautiful, because, you know, I've thought for a long time now that there's 2 ways to approach songwriting, and it parallels, and these are the 2 ways, that it parallels other art forms in the sense of you can start with the concept, you know what you want to say, and you kind of start working it, you know, and working it and find ways to move into that title or into what you want the song to be about. That's way number 1, and that's the way that I've always been used to. Way number 2 is that you have no idea what song is going to come to you or what the muse is going to bring your way. And you just pick up a guitar and you start playing, or you keyboard and you start playing, or you listen to something and you start imagining, and then a line, and then you start just singing gobbledygook, you know. And interestingly enough, this is the way McCartney used to write. I don't know what he does now, but he talks about, you know, he would sing names of vegetables to create a melody, you know, and so the vowels would fall and the consonants would fall in the right places for the melody he was creating. He didn't know what the song was going to be about. Yeah. He was all about the melody and the feel of it and being able to, so it's sung. The song's sung, you know, which is a different thing than poetry, which you're not singing. So that's this way too, is you let something come in that you don't know what it's going to be and let it direct you as you move through it. And I find that and I've written a couple of songs that way in the past, and they've been my favorite songs, because there were songs over which I felt I had very little control. They were songs that told me what they wanted to be as I was like, but you know, when you're in Nashville, everybody in Nashville writes from what they call a hook, which is kind of a
title.
the title, and calling it a hook is a little bit of I just don't like that so much, but
We use
it is too much like.
yeah, we use the word hook to describe too many things with music that are different. It's, but yeah, the Nashville Hook is more of the title versus the guitar riff, or
Right.
or like the hooky line of, you know, yeah.
But for those of us who are used to writing to a title, to not do that, it's a little bit of a leap of faith. So how was that experience for you? Is that something you would do again?
Well, I mean, I've got another song that's due tomorrow, or at least this weekend.
Get going now.
Yeah, I was actually late for the one that was last week. I was kind of tripped up by the way that I was approaching it, but I just had to approach it that particular way for that particular song, and it didn't actually come together till about 24 hours ago. Yesterday afternoon, finally, it like came together, and that was Wednesday. Usually that song is done Friday, so I was actually late for that one. So I got another one this Friday. Um, the way that this group is working is that they're giving a prompt, and so you can do whatever you want with that prompt. You can use that prompt as the title, or you can use that prompt as a jumping off point. And so what I have started doing is brainstorming. I'll write the prompt down, on a sheet of paper, and then brainstorm at least five, just top of my head, like, what does this make me think of? What is associated with this idea? And inevitably, usually, I shouldn't say inevitably, but typically, one of those ideas will kind of shine a little brighter for me than the other ideas. There's something about it that I want to dive into and explore a little bit. And it's a lot of times with me for songwriting, it's not that I know the answer before. I mean, this has to do with me as a writer in general, for essays as well. I generally don't know everything about what I want to say before I start writing. Like, it's the writing process that reveals the exploration, as the real
Right.
quote. It's the exploring of the questions that eventually leads me to the answer, or at least to some kind of articulated question that makes sense as a shape of a song or a story.
Right.
So, this song that I'll play later on the show, the prompt for this was trash. The prompt was trash. And so my process with this was, I was remembering, I was just associating, a few different things. What do I think of? And the thing I thought I wanted to write about was, my ex-husband brought home this broken 8-track tape recorder at some point, and brought it into the house. And this happened, kind of frequently, that he would find something and bring it home, like the way that your cat might leave a dead mouse at your doorstep, like like, hey baby,
I wasn't
got
gonna
this
go
for
there.
you. I got this, and but he brought it home because he thought it would be useful, and maybe we could repair it. Maybe he would use it. And of course, eventually, it just made its way from like the counter or from the table to a shelf into a closet, packed away, and eventually probably put back in the trash. And so I wanted to somehow write about this. And so for days and days, I was like worry beads, like worrying it. At the same time, I wanted to write a song that was in 6/8. I was, starting off with like a 1-2-5 progression, and then there was some other things that I was starting to get caught up in, and I had this idea and I had this stuff, and the changes and the feel were not working with this old 8-track tape recorder. So I feel like my block with that song for days was actually my over attachment to one or the other, and they were kind of warring. And I had to see which one would win the battle. And eventually I just let go of the recorder and just worked on the changes and just sat with it and played it over and over and over again, and then something emerged that was totally different. I'll say that the one other thing, when I was thinking about trash as the prompt, some of the other ideas that were coming through my head, I was remembering the raccoons that would get into the trash cans when I was growing up, because we didn't have these like incredibly, these like lockdown heavy trash cans that we have now. We had like the aluminum cans. And so I was thinking about that. And so raccoon did make it into the new song.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm
So, yeah.
feeling a lot of sympathy for the 8-track recorder.
I know.
Having been rescued once
Well, I
and
bequeath
then
it to you.
having been tossed out into the
Yeah.
world and then rescued once, making its way from one closer and closer and closer to the trash again. And then finally, wow.
Yeah, you just made
So,
me realize that tape recorder has been actually thrown out a number of times. Whoever threw it out the first time, and
right.
then the second time we threw it out, and then this time with the song idea, it's been thrown
Oh,
out
that's
again.
exactly. Exactly. Karma.
What can you do?
Yeah. It's funny.
So you're a poet and you're a songwriter, and you said just before that when you're writing songs, it's weird to write without having the guitar in hand. And then you said something, and I can't remember exactly your wording, but it made me wonder, when you're writing poetry, are you speaking the words aloud, or is it a quiet endeavor, just you and a pen on a page, or you at the typewriter?
It's a quiet endeavor. It's a quiet endeavor. I don't speak it out loud. And there are a lot of advantages to speaking it out loud in terms of embodying the the rhythm of what you're trying to do. And but I don't do that.
How did you come to poetry?
Well, how I came to poetry in the early 1990s. See, I actually remember how I came to poetry. In the early 1990s, Robert Bly, the poet, and Michael Mead, a storyteller from up in Vashon Island, up off of Washington coast there, and James Hillman, psychotherapist, and Coleman Barks. There's four of these men. Coleman Barks is the fellow who translated
Translator.
all the Rumi out of Persian at the University of Georgia. So these four guys, all older gentlemen, traveled around the country doing workshops for men, trying to establish kind of a baseline for what does it mean to be a man if you're not going to be a friggin' cowboy. If you're not going to follow the John Wayne model, if you're not going to be a bully, if you're not going to, be what does it mean to be a man? And so one of the things they did was they introduced people at these workshops to a lot of poetry, to some dance, to some dream work, and just a lot of open conversation. And they published a book. I'll get it for you before we get off this call, and I'll show it to everybody. It's called The Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart, and it's a collection, a big, thick collection of poetry that I have a copy of and I refer to often. It's got a lot of Rilke. It's got just some great, great stuff in there, and that's how I initially got introduced to poetry. And so at these workshops, I started sketching, which I'd never done that before. I would just take my notebook and sketch whatever I saw. Excuse me. So I have like a sketched record of some of the people that were at these old workshops, and I started writing a little bit of poetry then. And then in as I told you earlier, in '97, I had gotten to the point in Nashville where I realized that being a songwriter was not going to support me, and I needed to get a real job and be gainfully employed. So I started a remodel company, and it felt, and this is what I was telling you earlier about kind of abandoning one's creative life. So it felt like an abandonment that I was leaving songwriting, even though I continued to go to events and stuff. But my parting shot as a songwriter was to create this book of poetry, and that's that. And so I did, and that has been kind of a foundation for me now. This book of poetry that I wrote in '97. It's like 24 years ago. Maybe it's time for another one now. I don't know, but that's how I came to poetry originally, and the interest has developed over the years. I love Billy Collins. I like some of Mary Oliver. Some of the poets that are a little harder to really kind of get a handle on. I have more like Theodore Rothke. I have a little more trouble with poets like that. But I need easy access to what a poem is about for me to be able to get into it. I don't do well with poems that are just a little too opaque. Billy Collins describes it like some poems you walk in the door and you just reach inside the door and there's the light switch. Some poems you walk in, it's completely dark. There's no switch anywhere. You have to just keep walking room to room until you finally find a way to turn the light on.
Yeah.
So, and I don't do as well with and I don't write that kind of poetry. The kind of poetry I write is much more accessible and conversational.
So, as a parting shot to songwriting, you wrote a book of poetry. What is
Correct.
the relationship between poetry and song?
Well, it's a creative enterprise. Those are both creative enterprises. That's for me. That was the connection. It was an opportunity to be creative in a way, and find some fulfillment in self-publishing this book that I wasn't going to be able to do with my songwriting any longer. I think that was the connection there. There's a lot that's been said about what the relationship between poetry and, one difference between poetry and song, I alluded to it earlier, is that when you write a poem, there's a rhythm to it, and there's a sense of form and structure. In the kind of poetry that's modern poetry that's written today, it's not rhymed couplets and so forth and so on, but there's a structure. The poem determines the poem itself determines the structure. But in song, when you're writing a song, somebody has to get in front of a microphone and sing those words. And if the vowels don't land on the right notes, if the phrasing isn't right for the song, it doesn't work, And you don't have that issue with poetry. It's a whole different issue with poetry. So and that's something I really learned fairly recently. I'm always writing words for songs, that makes sense, but then, and I sing it because I sing it in a very conversational style. But a real singer, which I'm not, someone that's a trained singer that really can open their mouth and make it happen, isn't going to do so well with those kinds of songs. They want a song where they can really open up, and I'm just learning how to write that kind of music. It's a different way, lyrically, it's a whole different attention, focus, for the writing part. It's not, what you're writing, the actual word, the actual meaning sometimes is not as important as the way it's going to sing. And that is a crazy idea to me, but it's true. And that's why a lot of pop songs, which are sung by real singers like that, the lyrics are very secondary. They've been written such that they'll sing great, but they're not expected to be deep and substantial and have meaning the same way that like a folk song would have.
Right, and I talked about this. I can't remember if it was last week, or if it was the week before in the show. I recently attended a really cool talk by Susan Rogers, who was an engineer for Prince, and she's now working at I can't remember exactly what her PhD is in, but it's somewhere along the lines of the intersection between neuropsychology and music. And she brought up this bell curve, and pop music was in the center of the bell curve. So popular, a bell curve is
Yeah.
kind of showing the what's popular, and at either end of the curve. One end was I can't remember the name, that the word that she used to describe it, but it was simple. It was simplistic, and the other side was complex. And
Mm-hmm.
so the complex side was like avant-garde music, art music, um, you know, perhaps that's in the classical world or the folk world or the jazz world. It didn't matter about the genre, but just it was outside of pop music. And it was
Right.
more complex and harder and perhaps not as quantized, maybe, there are more imperfections in that. And on the other side, the simplistic side was a lot of repetition. Um, the listener could really anticipate. So children's music would be on that side, but also on that side is perhaps more traditional songs. Um, and she was showing that the bell curve is constantly moving. So it's always moving to the right, which is toward the ever more complex. So that the pop music, what becomes popular, becomes increasingly complex over the years.
Right.
Yeah, there's your bell curve. Yep. And what do you have written on each side?
I've got
The
simple and
Yeah,
complex.
you
And
got
then on the
it. Yeah,
top is pop. So,
yeah.
okay, I'm going to start here and tell me where you are.
Well, so
Where,
if you go to the very top of the curve, the pop music,
uh-huh.
there you go, right there. If you're right there, um, where that is constantly moving to that way,
The
toward
complex side.
toward complex. Yeah. So the
Yeah,
the
I'm
top
looking
of
at
that
it
curve
backwards,
is
so I can't do it.
yeah. Yeah. In any case, she was. How is this relating to what you were just saying about? So in terms of lyrical content of songs,
Right.
you know, when you think about pop music, um, at least with the chorus, that hook, at least with the part that's going to be the memorable hook of the song, it's usually pretty easily digestible. And she was saying that pop music, oh, that top part of the curve always is always simple enough for it to be familiar, but unusual enough for it to kind of spark a curiosity and for the listener to sort of be like, "Ooh, I want to listen to that." It's on the edge of what I'm used to, but
Mm-hmm.
the shape of it
Right.
is still
Right.
familiar. I don't think I
Well, that's
explained
great.
all of that as she was brilliant, but I found the talk absolutely fascinating.
Oh, no, I totally get it. So, thinking about a writer like Leonard Cohen, so heavily image laden lyric. Um, he wrote almost he wrote most of his, not all of his songs, most of his songs in common verse, common meter. You know, it served as a good foundation for what he wanted to try to say. Apparently, so much metaphor and so much things are so layered. It's like I listened to one of his songs, like Dylan. You listen to one of his older songs. You listen to a song, and the person next to you listens to the same song, and you're in totally different worlds. You both have a different idea what it was about, but each one of you is pretty sure that's what it's about. you
Mm,
know, because the song works on all these different levels,
right.
and that ability to write that kind of a song
Mm,
has always intrigued me and inspired me, and I've always wanted to be able to write like that. And I've written the couple of songs that I wrote where I did not write from a title,
mm,
kind of move in that direction. But I think I just love that kind of music, that kind of songwriting where
yeah.
it's it's um, it's not so linear and so discursive and this is what I'm about. This is my title. And, it's like it's really moving into something that allows you to access. In fact, what Leonard Cohen said about his songs like that, he said they point at something. They don't tell you what it is. They just kind of point towards it.
You know, I think of music like that as being, I mean, I think all music, all art is, to me, a conversation between the creator and the listener or the audience or the viewer or the reader, you know, depending on the art form. Um, you know, but those kinds of songs, to me, you know, when they spark that kind of activity in the mind of the listener, and the listener is sort of painting their own picture out of those words, you know, it's really like that's the other side of that dialogue. That's the other side of the conversation. And you know, something else that was interesting in that webinar that I attended with Susan Rogers was that she and her research partner were having a conversation about how they listen to music and what they're thinking about when they listen to music. And she said that when she listens to music, she is imagining the performance of the music. And her research partner was surprised at her at what she said, and was like, oh no, when I listen to music, I am imagining the story of my life as is pointed to use Leonard Cohen's words,
Right.
as pointed
Right.
to by the song. And so they got curious about what it is that people are thinking about, generally speaking, when they're listening to music. And they actually they created an experiment, and they asked people a survey. They asked about, I think it was about 2,000 people
Wow.
between the ages of 30 and 70, I believe, what they are thinking about when they listen to music. And the answers varied, but they were all, I think it was 5 or 7 categories that they all fell into. Some of them were, they imagined the performance of the song. Some of them imagined themselves performing the song, so they conflated themselves and the performer. Some of them were imagining the story of their own life, and some of them were thinking about the story of the song itself, like whatever the singer might be singing specifically about. And I forget, there were a
Right.
couple other categories, but it gave me, it made me think a little bit about that, because I always think that when people are reading a book or an essay or a poem or listening to music or whatever it is, that they're sort of taking that story and you know, almost like layering their own story on top of that, or layering that story
Right.
on top of, you know, whatever it is. And when I heard her talking about that, I was like, oh, not everybody does that. That's what I do, but that's not what everybody does. So,
Interesting.
you know, I'm sure that influences, you know, what kind of music people like to listen to, why
Yeah.
they like to listen to it.
Well, if they did the same experiment with 2,000 songwriters, on the one end you'd have, I could have written that song. And on the other hand, you'd have, man, I wish I'd written that song. That's all that's going through our brains.
What's a song that you wish you had written?
Oh, God. I wish I'd written the Gretchen Peters song 5 Minutes. If I'd written that song, I could have died right then. That would have been it for me. It's like, okay, I've done it.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that you didn't write it then, because that would be hard for you.
Really?
But that's wow, that's awesome. Have you
Yeah.
ever? Do you play that song? Have you ever like sat down with your guitar and played
Oh
it?
yeah, I've learned it. I learned it. I've sung that song 1,000 times. Just to feel what those words are coming out of my mouth. How does it feel for that to come out? You know, yeah, because it's a brilliant, brilliant work.
I love that. I'm wondering what I would answer myself if you were to ask me back that question. I've got to think about it a little bit.
Do you have one that you
Yeah, I'm not sure.
that you wish
I
you'd
mean,
written?
there are many times. Oh, you know, yeah, there are many songs that when I hear them, I'm like, oh man, I wish I had written them. But just now I thought of one. There's a songwriter here based in LA. Her name is, she goes by the name LP, the 2 letters LP. And she writes a lot of pop songs for other people, but she also writes and performs her own work. And there are a couple of songs of hers. There are 2 if I can conjure them up in my head right now. Lost on You. Lost on You. I wish
I'll
I
make
had
a note
written
of that.
song. Yeah, LP. Yeah.
All right.
So Rags, let's Rags. You mentioned those what is a man? What makes a man? What it is to be a man?
Oh,
With
right.
Coleman
Rags and
Barks
Bones.
right.
Yeah.
Is there a relationship there between
Oh, yeah.
Rags and Bones? Okay.
Yeah. The the reason that Bly and Hillman and Coleman Barks and them all called their collection, that collection of poetry they put together, the Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart, is because William Butler Yeats has a poem that he wrote pretty much at the end of his life. I think he was in his 80s, and it was in the last collection of his that was published, called The Circus Animal's Desertion. And the deal is, all of the verses, it's a fairly long poem, but each verse, each stanza of the poem, he's talking about an image from his prior poetry that he's written. And at the end, it's like he feels like he's been parading around these images over and kind of recycling them over and over again. And he doesn't want to do that anymore. He wants to try to just go to the center of something and get down into something else, something deeper, something in his heart. And so the title of the poem is Circus Animal's Desertion, which is perfect. And the last line of the poem is, now I have to go down to where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. So that's where I got the name. And you may know that in the 20th century and early 20th century, late 19th century, England and Europe generally, that there were these old men that would walk through the streets pulling carts and collecting trash in their carts and then repurposing it somehow and make a living that way. And they were called rag and bone men, or rag men. So there's a way in which you and I, as songwriters, are collecting things that we find detritus everywhere around us and repurposing it into song. All
Except
these stories that we, so there's that way of thinking about it too. So that's where the name comes from.
I love it.
In fact, I called my act Rags and Bones Music, and that's ragsandbonesmusic.com. That's the name of my website.
Yeah.
But a couple of years ago, there's a guy out of England who calls himself the Rag and Bone Man, who's a great, really good songwriter and a fabulous, deep, raspy, Tom Waitish kind of voice, who got very popular. So if you Google Rag and Bone, he's, for the first 1,000 pages, it's all him. And I thought, if anyone's ever going to find me, it's not going to be through Rags and Bone. So I just started calling it Rags Rosenberg, because there's not going to be too many of those around.
I can't help but think when you're talking about, picking up the trash and reusing it, and it's the same thing that happens, with the folks who come through and go through the trash cans and pull out the recyclables and, bring them to the centers but also it made me think about that old 8-track recorder that I couldn't do anything with. I love that. Well, Rags, what have you been reading lately? What's on your nightstand?
Well, I've been having a hard time finding a good novel, and I've had a couple recommended to me that I've started and not been able to finish. I love a good novel. I love...
What novels do you love?
Stegner, what's his first name? The Angle of Repose is a great novel. That's one that I love. Ken Kesey's got one. I can't think of the title right now that Catherine gave me that I really, really love too. So a couple of novels, but finding novels of that. I read a lot of short stories. Joyce Carol Oates. I bought a bunch of her short stories, and I also recently read John. I think his first name is John Cheever's. His diary. He's got you can read his diary, which is really interesting. But I've got this group of books here that I was just going to show you. That are, I'll just do one at a time. Simulacra and Simulation, Jean Baudrillard.
Yeah.
This book is really, this is a philosopher from, obviously from France. Are you familiar with it? Do you know this at all?
I haven't read the book, but yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
So the whole idea behind what he's saying is that we now, and we can see it even more. This was written, I don't know when this was published. It's been a long time. This is an old book. So this printing was 2000, but I mean, I think this was written, 1981 was the original. Before that, this is pre-digital. He's looking at the world and he's going, we no longer perceive the world as it is. We perceive the world as an image of what it is, a simulacra of what it is. And he uses Disneyland as an example. But it's a really interesting way to think about what we're all dealing right now. And he comes off of the work of an earlier philosopher, Guy Debord, who wrote a book about spectacle. He said, and you can really see it now. You see it with this Chauvin trial. You see it with the election. Our entire culture is focused around spectacle. And we're all in it together. It's not like you can get out of it, unless, I don't know how you would get out of it. So that's one thing that I keep close at hand, because I just want to keep reminding myself. And I've tried to do a little writing about it, but there's ways in which it's a little too complicated for my simple brain. Poetic Diction, Owen Barfield is another one. Really good book for a writer to have. I remember Leonard Cohen talking about this book. He said it really influenced him when he was in school. And I thought, well, I want to see what this is about. William Empson, 7 Types of Ambiguity. Another book that's a little hard to kind of get through, but worth it. And Anatomy of Criticism. This guy, Northrop Frye, was one of what they called the new criticism back in the 40s. 1940s. And so I wanted to learn a little bit about kind of what makes a story. How are they put together,
Yeah.
And this book is really good for that. And then this one, Poetry, Language, Thought, Heidegger. And I bought this book before I found out that he had been a fascist, which was really difficult for me to learn. But he had a particular essay. This is a collection of essays. One of the essays is called, it's about poets. It's about what is a poet for, is what it's called. And this, of course, is translated out of the German. What is a poet for? And what he says in this, and this is why I keep this close at hand, he says, since we have abandoned the gods, plural, gods, since we have abandoned the gods, and we've abandoned them because we no longer have ritual, we no longer feed the gods, and so they've gone. They're not getting what they need from us, and so they're no longer here. Since we are in a dark period, a very dark period, we don't know where in the dark period we are. Is it midnight? Is it 3 a.m.? We don't know. What poets are for is to tell us where we are in the darkness. That's what this essay says. So I keep this close at hand because it reminds me that writers have a role to play in our current situation. David White gave me this book. This is Robert Hawes, 20th Century Pleasures. And it's another collection of literary criticism. And it's just, some of the things he says in here are just so cool. They're just full of great quotes. He talks about imagery. He's talking about Robert Lowell, and he says what made Lowell's poetry so powerful was the imagery, and the imagery served as the underbelly of the thing said. So the image, like there's a poem of Lowell's where there's a carving knife on a table. But he doesn't say anything about it other than the fact that it's there. But the fact that the image of the carving knife, there's something under that, in terms of how it affects your sense of what the poem is doing and what it's about. So that idea of the importance of imagery as a thing not said. What do they say? In songwriting, they say you need to evoke, not describe. So it's a similar kind of thing. And then this is probably my favorite. This is Nine Gates, Entering the Mind of Poetry, Jane Hirschfield. And I went to the Napa Writers Conference 2 years ago. Of course, last year they didn't have it because of COVID. And she was there, and she signed it for me. Look at that, Jane Hirschfield. 2 rags. In gratitude for your attention to may every gate open before you. Isn't that nice? So what I want to do from this book, if I may, I want to read you one sentence. And this one sentence is the most important reason why I keep this book close by. You ready? Mm-hmm. Every good poem begins in language, awake to its own connections. Language that hears itself and what is around it, sees itself and what is around it, looks back at those who look into its gaze, and knows more perhaps even than we do about who and what we are. That's a hell of a sentence. Mm-hmm. So I decided after reading that sentence that I was going to learn how to diagram sentences. Because in the fifth grade I never learned. So it's like, and so I took a class from this woman online, really good class on diagramming sentences. And my goal was, and it took me 6 months, but after 6 months I was able to diagram that sentence. So that's how crazy I am.
I love it, and I can totally relate to that impulse. The beginning of that sentence, though, can you read I think it was just the first five words of it.
Sure. Every good poem begins in language awake to its own connections.
Every good poem begins in language. That was that idea. I feel like just that alone, I can sit with that for a while and think about every art form and what is the thing that it begins in, and whether language or like the sound of words or the sound of tones or the rhythm, just thinking about that a little bit. What did you learn by diagramming the whole sentence about language?
I don't want to do it anymore. It was enough. When I don't do any more diagramming now. But what I learned about that sentence and the structure of it is its parallel construction. So it consists of a main clause, which all sentences have at least one main clause, and then a series of subordinate clauses that are very artfully put together. Every good poem begins in language awake to its own connections. Language that hears itself and what is around it. There's a clause. There's a phrase. That's not a clause, it's a phrase. I learned that that's a phrase because it doesn't have a subject and a predicate. Sees itself and what is around it. See, again, that wouldn't stand on its own as a sentence. So it's a phrase, not a clause. Looks back at those who look into its gaze and knows more perhaps even than we do about who and what we are. So it's a main clause with a whole series of subordinate clauses and phrases that amplify and expand on the main clause. That's what I learned about that.
And when we should move into music in a minute, but I want to kind of I'm making a connection right now between your diagramming the sentence and what you're getting out of it, and the work that you did when you were in Nashville, not as a songwriter, but as a, remind me you were not doing construction, but it was in construction.
I was a remodel contractor.
Remodel contractor. And
Right.
Were you working with, were you actually, with your hands in the materials, or were you contracting the work? Were you actually doing the work, or were you contracting the work for
My
others?
company there started out with just me doing all the work.
Yeah.
Jay Jorn was my first employee. I hired an employee eventually because I started to get a little bit of work where I needed help. And it just built up from there. And after, 3 or 4 years, I couldn't wear my tools anymore. If I wore my tools and tried to work on the job, the work would run out. I had to
Yeah.
hustle up work for all the people that were working for me. I had 7 or 8 people working for me, really good folks in Nashville, and I needed to keep them busy once things got going, and so I became I became a salesman. I took a damn class to sell. I had to learn how to do that, and I've never had a lot of. I hate to say this because it's so judgmental, but I've never had a lot of respect for salesmen, for salespeople, because the idea of trying to sell you something, and that's why self-promotion is so antithetical to me. And most of us songwriters, we hate promoting ourselves because we're trying to create art. You're not trying to make it commercial. You're trying to create something artful. And so yeah, like that. So eventually I was just a businessman.
Yeah. Well, I'm putting together your interest in how a sentence is constructed with how a business is constructed, and how
Right,
and the
right.
construction that you would do in that business, and just your curiosity about the structure of a song, the structure of a poem, the structure of that particular sentence and sentences in general, and then this other work that you did, which someone else might look at songwriting and remodeling, as two totally different worlds, and yet I feel like there are a lot of connection points. A lot of you're just building something different. It's just a different
Right,
thing, but working
right.
with different material. Um,
Yeah, well, one thing they have in common, just very quickly, is
yeah.
something that Leonard Cohen said once, which is, I think it's in the song Anthem. He says, "You can
Mm,
add something like you can add all the parts, but you won't have the sum."
mm,
So that
yeah.
how we built home, we created homes, but we did it out of sticks of wood.
Mm,
We created something that didn't really exist. And same with
yeah.
songwriting. It's like it's not all just the notes and the
Yeah.
words, and there's something else that enters in at a certain point, its own soul.
Yeah. It's not just the
So
fact that it's put together; it's how it's put together. It's what it becomes when it is put together.
it's what it becomes when it's put
Yeah.
together. It's greater than some of its parts.
Yeah. I am currently reading, I just started reading, you can't see it, but The Satanic Versus, Salman Rushdie's novel,
Oh,
which
uh-huh.
is getting quite a flare of light there, but there you have it. And what did I just read before this? Oh, just before I was reading Ann Petrie's The Street. And this is a very different kind of book in the style of writing, and I love, love, love language. I love slow reading. I like a sentence that I just kind of have to sit there and digest it. And so I've just started this book, and I'm so pleased with it so far. And it starts off with two people tumbling through the air, having fallen out of an airplane, I suppose. Um, and I'll just read this little bit. Um, the aircraft cracked. Sorry, let me start that again. The aircraft cracked in half, a seed pod giving up its spores, an egg yielding its mystery. Two actors, prancing Gabriel and buttoney-pursed Mr. Saladin Khamkha, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, fell like tidbits of tobacco from a broken old cigar. Above, behind, below them in the void, there hung reclining seats, stereophonic headsets, drinks trolleys, motion discomfort receptacles, disembarkation cards, duty-free video games, braided caps, paper cups, blankets, oxygen masks. Also, for there had been more than a few migrants aboard, yes, quite a quantity of wives who had been grilled by reasonable, doing their job officials about the length of and distinguishing moles upon their husbands' genitalia, a sufficiency of children upon whose legitimacy the British government had cast its ever reasonable doubts, mingling with the remnants of the plain, equally fragmented, equally absurd. There floated the debris of the soul-broken memories, sloughed off selves, severed mother tongues, violated privacies, untranslatable jokes, extinguished futures, lost loves, the forgotten meaning of hollow, booming words, land, belonging, home. I'll just leave it at that. I'm so
Wow.
enjoying this book, and I've just gotten into it, so that's all I'll
Tell me,
share.
tell me the name again.
It's Salman Rushdie's book.
Oh,
The
it's Salman
Satanic-
Rushdie. Oh,
Yeah,
right,
the
right, yeah.
Satanic Versus.
Yeah, he took a little heat for writing that book, didn't
He
he?
sure did. Yeah, there was a price on his head for that one. Rags, you and I connected over a song circle a couple of months ago. You played a song that was inspired by David Whyte's poem Faith, and I have
Right.
also written a song inspired by the same poem. And so your song, when
Yay.
you played it, it really sparked my curiosity. And I think you're going to share that song today on the show, right? And you also have the poem here to share, right?
I do.
Let's hear it.
All right, Faith by David Whyte. I want to write about faith, about the way the moon rises over cold snow, night after night, faithful even as it fades from fullness, slowly becoming that last curving and impossible sliver of light before the final darkness. But I have no faith myself. I refuse it even the smallest entry. Let this, then, my small poem, like a new moon, slender and barely open, be the first prayer that opens me to faith.
I love that poem.
Yeah.
Will you play us the song?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. How's the guitar? Can you hear it okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
So this is a co-write with Keith Greninger. Let me get the lyrics up where I can see them, because as I said earlier, I can't remember a damn thing about any of my songs anymore. The night fades into morning. The desert sky so cold and clear. We've been up all night talking, watching that old moon disappear. I know all about disappearing. Baby, I know you do too. Love was easy to believe in when that hunter's moon was new. Night after night, even as she fades from view, climbing up the sky. Oh, the faith of the moon. Oh, the faith of the moon. Sometimes the darkness gathers round us. Sometimes it's so hard to believe. Facing our fears is never easy. I'm begging you, baby, please don't leave. I know all about leaving. I was always first to run for the door. This time, baby, I'm not running. No, I'm not running anymore. Night after night, even as she fades from view, climbing up the skyline. Oh, the faith of the moon, faith of the moon. I know all about leaving. I was always first for the door. This time, baby, I'm not running. No, I'm not running. I'm not running anymore, no. Night after night, even as she fades from view, climbing up the sky. Oh, the faith of the moon, faith of the moon.
So lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like I just went on vacation. That was really nice. Thank you, Rags. The guitar playing is so gorgeous, too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you have a song that you wrote that was inspired by the same poem.
I do, yeah.
Yay.
And I'm not going to play that song today. I was thinking when I first booked you, I thought, oh, I'll play that song, you'll play your song, and that would be really interesting. I love art that inspires other art, and then to hear another
Right.
interpretation of that. But as it turns out, I have been writing a song a week now.
Oh,
and,
right.
And I have not pulled that song out for a couple of months. And in any case, I have this new song that's 24 hours old.
Wow.
That I thought I would play.
That's brave.
So, right here, every week, just doing the brave things with Tomes and Tunes. Rob Still, thank you for being here. Suzanne, here we go. Suzanne, beautiful song, Rags. So nice to have you
thank you.
watching, Suzanne, thank you. And Rob Still, he's in Nashville. Thank you, Rob, for being here. We have Tom Smith coming from Boston. Hey, Tom.
All right.
Thank you for watching. And Catherine from J-Tree.
Yeah.
Woohoo. Very nice. So I guess we'll just take it out with this song. Let's see here. One part alabaster moon, one part rustling old raccoon, one part whisper of a breeze, one part heady jasmine blooms, one part lovely nightbird tunes, one part two hearts beat. Might we make an apothecary potion, or bottle it like Napa wine? Might we capture all we left unspoken? Cork it up for future but let's bottle up tonight. Spotlight of a street lamp, beam, shadows dancing in between. Familiar as an old refrain. All the stories of the past, the future ones that come too fast, past the edges of the frame. Might we make an apothecary potion, or bottle it like Napa wine? Might we capture all we left unspoken? Cork it up for future delight. Whatever time might hold, whatever fate unfolds, forget all that we can't control. But let's bottle up. Whatever time might hold, whatever fate unfolds, forget all that we can't control. But let's bottle up tonight.
All right. Wow, that's great.
Hot
I
off the
see.
presses.
I see where you took that thing about the trash. That's really interesting. Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, the
Yeah.
raccoon was like, I just started thinking about that raccoon instead of that old 8-track recorder. I was like, what about that raccoon? I'm kind of interested in that little guy. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rags, for spending time with me today. This has been so delightful.
Yeah.
I really appreciate all
Thanks
the
for the
talk and
invitation. I
poetry.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Before I let you go, do you have any shows or anything that you want to share with the folks, with the kind folks that might be coming up?
The only show I have coming up is on June 5th at Sculptero Winery up on the Central Coast. I'll be playing there in the afternoon with Steve Key.
Oh, cool.
So yeah,
Very
that's
nice.
that's the only show I've got scheduled. If they ever get cranked back up here at the Joshua Tree Saloon, I'll go back to playing there on Mondays and Fridays. But
Oh,
that
yeah.
hadn't happened yet.
It'll happen. It'll happen soon.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. How about you? You have shows coming up?
Oh gosh, I'm playing one on May 18th online for Song Circle. Well, it's a I think there are 3 or 4 of us performing, and it's a show that happens every week called Music Your Mother Would Not Like. And I love that there's no contraction. It's not music your mother wouldn't like. It's music your
Right.
mother would not like.
Right.
And that's set up by Baker Booking out in on the East Coast. So that's May 18th. It's in about a month, but I'll share it here. And thanks for asking, because
Yeah.
I should start talking about it. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for your kind words. Wow. You just gave birth to yet another piece of beautiful poetry put to music. Oh, Suzanne, thank you so much.
Yeah, totally.
And Rob Still, thank you so much for being here too. And Mark, I see you from Dallas, Texas. Thanks for being here, Mark. And Rags, thank you for
Yeah.
being here. I can't wait till I can share a stage with you, or a winery, or a Joshua Tree Saloon, or something like that. Or,
Yeah.
maybe
I'll
get
look
on
forward
stage.
to it.
Yeah, me too. You stay right there. I'm gonna end the show right like this and say goodbye to all of y'all. Thank you for being here for Tomes and Tunes 48, episode 48. Rags Rosenberg. Please find his stuff. Find him online and listen to him on Spotify. This is where I'm listening to music, but wherever you like to listen to music, you'll be able to find him. And he's a fine songwriter. Indeed. Next week for episode 49, I have Stella Schindler from the band Kentucky Avenue. She is based in Washington, D.C. She is a delightful person, a wonderful songwriter. I can't wait to talk books and swap songs with her next week. So until then, please take good care, be safe, be sound, and I'll see you soon.